People told me we were crazy. Very well-known media execs, some of whom I think would call us and say, you're making a huge mistake. You have this cool brand. Go raise a bunch of money and put video on Facebook, right? The whole pivot video thing.
Oh, yeah, that was the thing at the time.
And we were so lucky in the fact that we just had no idea how to even do that. So I always say we were the only team who could have built Morning Brew, and it's not a compliment, it's an insult.
Because you were so bad at everything else.
Yeah, we had no idea. We barely could put out a daily email. So, Axios comes out, I think 2018, 2019, and they launched 10 newsletters. We're like, 10 newsletters? We can barely do one. They come out and they're doing events. We said, events? We can't write a newsletter. But the very best thing we ever did was, for longer than anyone else, stay more focused than anyone else on the one thing that mattered to us, which is write, grow, and sell the best possible newsletter. So by the time we launched something else, no other newsletter had 1 million, 1.5 million, 2 million subscribers. So we started dipping our toe in the water in some of these B2B verticals, whether it was marketing or retail, but the machine was built. That daily newsletter was a $10 million plus product. And so we were fueling everything with profits from the newsletter. We raised one round of funding in 2017. We raised $750,000. We barely dipped into that money, and we never raised money again. And it was because we were not investing in other things. We just said, hey, let's become best in the world at this one thing.
Welcome to The Peel. I'm your host, Turner Novak, founder of Banana Capital. Today's guest is Austin Rief, co-founder and CEO of Morning Brew, the Wall Street Journal for the younger generation.
Classic story of an audience being underserved and the light bulb moment of I can do it better.
We go inside building the company from 0 to 6 million subscribers and 70 million in revenue in 6 years.
You hear these stories about product market fit. You rarely see that floodgate open in media.
They sold part of the company to Business Insider in 2020, and we get into the nuances of building and scaling an ad business and how Austin would start a new media company from scratch today.
What Overtime is doing is brilliant.
The creator economy.
I only see the creator economy getting more and more competitive. There has to be a real reason why that creator is creating that product.
Reflecting on our early stage investing in 2021.
But if the whole market was 2x overvalued and you're investing at 10 or 20% discounts, you're still way off of where you need it to be to have great returns.
Being the first advertiser on Instagram stories.
And for 3 or 4 days, we were getting 2-cent CACs. And it really is a sign that it is worth being early to a platform. You're probably going to miss on 9 out of 10, but that 10th out of 10 can change your life. It was product market fit with the best possible top of funnel we could ever find.
The best way to do reference checks.
References from people who they give you are fairly useless.
And his secret for sourcing remote talent in Sri Lanka.
I was like probably customer 4, and I said, this is incredible. This caliber of talent is so good.
Before we talk to Austin, I publish new episodes every week. Check the back catalog of almost 100 episodes, comment on Spotify and YouTube, share this with a friend who might like it, check the show notes to go deeper on the topics we discussed, and subscribe so you never miss a future episode. Let's talk to Austin. Austin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I feel like we could have done this a long time ago, but I'm glad we're doing it now because I think it's going to be an awesome conversation. Just state of the world, everything going on, where you're at with Morning Brew. Speaking of Morning Brew though, if you were to start a media company today, starting from scratch, what would you do?
Yeah, I think a lot of people out there are trying to recreate the Morning Brew model. I think a lot of people have, based off the success of a lot of these SaaS platforms, maybe you've invested or you know of a lot of them, whether it's Beehive, which obviously is former Morning Brew employees, or a Circle. These platforms are awesome. They democratize what we did at Morning Brew, but I also think they make standing out really, really challenging. And so there's 2 angles I would go. I think one's heavily spoken about and one is less so. So the first angle would be going deep B2B or passion audiences.
These are the heavily spoken about. People kind of know this strategy.
Yeah. So a lot of people talk about like going deep B2B. And I think, Industry Dive really championed that. I think there's a way to go deeper though, and you can build events and subscriptions, but that's known. I think that's the standard path. Or again, in that vein, maybe create a publication for Ferrari owners. I think that if you had a publication for Ferrari owners, that'd be very valuable if your audience was every Ferrari owner on the planet. But
do you know Craig Fuller at FreightWaves?
I love Craig. Craig's great.
Yeah, that's an insane, niche in terms of number of followers or number of subscribers, but insanely valuable. It's just people who own planes. Like it's like flying magazines for like private jets, essentially. Insane audience.
And I don't know if you saw, but he's doing now the same thing, I believe, for yachts. So he bought a collection of yachting magazines as well. And what's so smart about what he's doing is he didn't say, hey, I'm going to buy this thing, or sorry, build this thing from scratch. He's buying these legacy magazines that have really high, really wealthy audiences, high affinity audiences, right? The people who read, private jet magazines, probably really into them. But because they're magazine businesses, they don't trade at 10 times revenue. They don't even trade at 10 times EBITDA. My guess, and I have zero insider information, but my guess is he's buying those for 2 to 4 times EBITDA. And this actually goes into that second category that I didn't get to yet that I was going to talk about, but he's using that media that has high affinity, high intent from a user to go do something, but he's saying, hey, I'm going to buy this at 2x, but then I'm going to put that audience's attention on something that's probably worth 5, 10, 20 times EBITDA, if not 10 times revenue, like real estate, for example, or maybe financing for private jets. I think that's a really interesting play.
Yeah. So I had him on the podcast probably like 8 months ago. I'll throw a link to the episode if people want to check it out in the description. But yeah, he bought land and just made an airport basically, and then you could buy houses on like the strip that had like a hangar in the house essentially. So you take this magazine and you're like a real estate developer. Like you just flip the business model. It's insane.
Well, if you think about that, it's actually not that dissimilar from what someone like Ryan Serhant is doing, right? You could argue Ryan Serhant's a media company that just happens to monetize via the 2 or 3% that real estate brokers get. And I think that, if you asked me the original question, and a roundabout way of answering it is, that's what I would do is I would find a really passionate, or I build or ideally buy a passionate audience, but one that's not monetized well. And instead of trying to fight the uphill climb of doing ads or subscriptions, I would probably have those, but I would have a much higher like purpose or a much larger ambition. I'll give you an example, and I know you know it well because you're actually an investor in it. But what Overtime's doing is brilliant. So I'll talk your book for just a second. So I can name 10 off the top of my head, companies who basically said, hey, we're going to take sports highlights, put them on Instagram, put them on Snapchat, put them on the next platform. They've all raised a bunch of venture money. And it truly is the definition of insanity, right? They're doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. They've all gone to zero. But Overtime said, hey, we're going to take that same strategy, but instead of just making money off ads, which they do, we're going to build basketball leagues, and we're going to compete in some ways with the NBA or with other cable providers. I'm sure, going to sell tickets to games. I'm sure they already doing this. They're going to sell that TV package to ESPN or whoever. So that's what I would do is I'd say, let me find an interesting audience. Let me ideally go buy someone who is aggregating that audience or in a really passionate way. But then I wouldn't think, okay, let's stop at ads or subscription. I'd say, no, what's the big bet we can take? Is it sports? There's a lot of interesting stuff in sports. I mean, the UFC is a media company. F1's a media company. Overtime. Or it could be, if I started that audience of Ferrari owners, maybe I end up buying a car museum or whatever it may be. But that's what I would do. I try to pair a passionate audience with a much better business model, because there's never been a better time to create content, zero marginal cost to create content, but there's never been a worse time to monetize content via ads or subscriptions. It's just so hard. So I personally wouldn't do it again. I wouldn't put those two together, and I'd find other ways to monetize.
Yeah, and it's interesting with Overtime. Like when you take that example, they've got these leagues. They have a basketball league or whatever. A lot of these startup sports leagues that have tried to happen in the past. A lot of them fail because they can't make money, and most of the time it's brand deals and then like TV rights. So they're kind of starting to sell the TV rights, but they already monetize all the content with ads. So it's like, oh, by the way, Gatorade sponsor the content, but then also put you in the league. So you kind of solve that cold start problem too. But then you also have all this distribution online to then get people to pay attention to the leagues. And then you do different categories too. I think they have They have basketball. They have a flag football league, which I'm not sure how big that one is, and they have a boxing concept also that's relatively new, but I think it's doing pretty well. People seem to care about boxing.
Yeah, I don't know too much about that, but it makes a lot of sense because at Morning Brew, I've been doing this for almost a decade now. And the hardest part of selling ads is getting a CMO to actually care about you. When you're small, in a counterintuitive way, we used to go into meetings with American Express or big firms and we say, hey, we want to work with you so badly. We're actually going to give you a really great deal. We're only going to charge you 50 grand. The problem is American Express can't only spend 50 grand on something. They're deploying, we can look it up. I'm sure ChatGPT can pull up quickly, but they're probably deploying hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars a year on marketing campaigns. And so it's actually inefficient. Even if you're giving them a discount, it's inefficient for American Express 5 years ago to work with Morning Brew. Today, it's 70 million of revenue. It's more interesting. But if you're overtime and you say, hey, you can buy media and you can buy live and you can buy basketball and we can partner with our fast stations, right? Our fast providers. So you can buy OTT as well. All of a sudden you have a portfolio where it probably is worth the CMO of American Express's time. And if you are going to be in an ad-based business, and I'm not against ad-based businesses, I just think it's one piece of the puzzle. You need to have enough such that the head of an agency or CMO is going to actually want to meet with you. And that is why I think what they're doing is really interesting. They give you a full 360-degree experience. So again, you told me 5 years ago, overtime would be where they are. Today, I would have said you're absolutely crazy. I didn't get it. And now looking back, it makes a ton of sense. And I think that's a multi-billion-dollar company.
That's good to hear. As an investor in the company. So what's your opinion then on kind of more creator-led businesses? Like, is that a good idea?
To me, it's not good or bad, right? There are going to be really successful creator-led businesses, but I think the creator economy, and I think we're getting to an inflection point, but the creator economy was where the direct-to-consumer economy was, let's call it maybe 10 or 8 years ago, where people saw all these tools, Shopify, targeted Google ads, targeted Facebook ads. They said, look, I can go buy something essentially off Alibaba, some crappy mattress. I'm going to put it in a box. I'm going to ship it to you. And even that had a little bit of innovation, which is better than a lot of these creator-led companies. And you see that. And a lot of these creator-led companies are simply just slapping a logo on a product and selling it. I don't think long-term that's going to work. It's probably going to work for Mr. Beast because he's the biggest, right? It probably will work for Logan Paul because he's big as well. But I think a lot of these creators creating commoditized products with no real story as to why it makes sense other than, oh, I like that creator. I only see the creator economy getting more and more competitive. Things are going to be niched down like they were in the direct-to-consumer world. So yes, I love the idea of a creator creating a product, but there has to be a real reason why that creator is creating that product. And ideally, there's actual real innovation in the space. It's actually a really useful, cool product. A great example of that is, I can't remember his name, but his handle is Plant Daddy.
Kevin Espiritu. He's also been on the show, Epic Gardening.
So someone like that, that's awesome, right? Because he's acquired really interesting seeds and he's giving you a real reason to buy his product. He gives you the content. But at the end of the day, what's my reason to buy a creator's drink or to buy, I like them, but affinity wanes. Ultimately, I do think the ones that are going to win out over the course of a decade need to actually have true benefit above and beyond, oh, I just like this person, so I'm going to buy their whatever it may be.
Yeah, it's kind of just like they're good marketers, and you combine a good product with good marketing, get it in front of people, get their attention, and like I don't know. I mean, maybe an example is like Kellogg's from the mid 1900s or whatever. Like they started creating these characters that they sold to kids, right? They just had commercials, and it was like, hey, Fruit Loops, like it's this cool toucan bird, and there's like rainbows, and it's all in color, and then you get it, and it's like just full of sugar, and it tastes really good. It's like. It kind of makes sense, like from that angle.
Or look at Disney, right? And Disney's ability to license their brand on everything. And it's because, they again, I put Disney like the Mr. Beast bucket where it's like they actually have that huge scale and they have really interesting IP as well. They're kind of both, right? They the scale of the Mr. Beast, probably obviously much bigger, but they do have unique IP that, they're not just doing pranks on YouTube. There's 10 people doing pranks on YouTube, and there'll be 100 tomorrow, 1,000 the next day. So if you're hey, I do pranks on YouTube and I sell, you know, sugar in a can, I don't know how sustainable that is long term.
Yeah, you need to have something like there's also CBD in it, or we've like removed all the sugar, like it's sugar free, or it has steroids, so like you'll get ripped from drinking it or something. Like you need to do something that actually makes it different.
And what you said is actually really interesting. I think there is a huge wave, a huge push into this health and wellness space. And, whole foods, real foods. And I'm looking forward to creators really leaning into that. I think creators have leaned into the better for you or maybe marginally better for you.
Yeah, quote unquote better for you. Yeah.
Yeah, better for you than what? And something that's absolutely terrible. Yes, that is true, but I'm not sure if that's what you want to compare yourself to. I think if a few creators start leaning into that space, they can really build out a niche. I don't think people are, of course, there are some people on Twitter talking about all this. Brian Johnson writes done a really good job, but we need, and Brian Johnson's great for the health and wellness space because you always need someone leading the charge, being the extremist. So that makes everyone else seem like they're not as
They're
extreme.
less crazy than this crazy guy.
Yeah, less. I love Brian Johnson. I think he's an absolute character.
Yeah, great marketing.
Amazing marketing, but he's going to pave the way for someone like you or me or whoever. Hey, look, I'm not trying to never die. I'm just trying to improve my health span and just enjoy my life. And here's an awesome product. And it makes sense for me because of X, Y, and Z. And I think that's going to be a really great opportunity. And I think there's some people doing protein powders and things like that. But then there's another wave coming of that.
I don't really do much CPG investing. I've invested in one CPG company. And it's kind of one of those things where VC 101 is, CPG is bad. It doesn't make sense. But I can't remember if we were recording when you mentioned this, but the lower your valuation, like the entry point you come in at, you actually could get venture-like returns, right? It's like you invest at 3 million, 6 million posts, the company gets acquired for 700 million by Kellogg's, and you got an 80x or like a 150x. Like that's actually really good. Like it can work.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny that the big topic of conversation in 2020 through 2022, after a lot of the bubble bursts on this D2C world, because they created, I think, mostly commoditized products and they were marketing hacks, not product innovations, was no one invested in D2C. And similar to you, I didn't do much CPG D2C investing. I did write checks in two people who I really liked, but I didn't necessarily even believe in their products. I don't think we were recording, but I won't say the company's name, but I invested in the company. He started two successful companies before this. This is his third company. I said, look, I think this idea is terrible, but I'm going to give you money because I really respect you and you must see something I'm not seeing. And fast forward 3 years, they're approaching 100 million of ARR. It's a subscription product and they're, ripping 25 to 30% EBITDA margins. And I'm getting a distribution check every couple months for the price of my investment.
No way.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so the reason I was able to do that was because it was 6 million posts. And so if the company's worth, I don't know, maybe $250 million today, yeah, that's a 40x right now. And so, yeah, I think CPG DSC can absolutely work. You just can't invest it 30, 40, 50 in the seed round like people were in 2022.
Yeah, I know. I know we weren't recording at this one, but we were both reflecting on that where it's like we probably just did it too much. And it's like, but it's interesting because it kind of, I don't know if I've ever mentioned it on the podcast, but I've definitely mentioned it publicly before, is on a relative basis. Like when you see other people doing it at 100 million posts and you're like, I'm only at 30, it's pretty reasonable. But at the end of the day, like it should have been 6. You're like, shit, it was still way too high. So I think that's one of the big things I got tripped up on throughout just 2020, 2021 was I wasn't thinking on an absolute basis. I was thinking more relatively, and relatively I felt like I was doing pretty well. But then on an absolute basis, it was like, instead of being like 10x overvalued, you were 5x and like you still messed up. Like it was still too high.
So, and look, I think the tough thing, if I have my timeline right, you were an emerging manager. You maybe were on fund one of your first standalone fund in 2020, 2021 time.
Yeah, it was the top.
Yeah, your job is to deploy money. If you went to your LPs and said, look, I raised all this money and I'm just going to sit on it for 2 years because I think valuations are too high, you would, and Bitcoin's at 60,000 and all these companies are raising at crazy valuations. Your investors would have asked for their money back. They said, what are you doing? It's almost like Michael Burry in The Big Short. Obviously not to that extent, but basically you have had to tell your investors, hey, I raised money to invest in companies. I'm not going to invest in companies. And that's really, really hard. And so I think you're right. You were, and so was I think a lot of people were in the mental space of, okay, I need to deploy this money in 24 months. And given I need to do that, let me look for lower valuations. But if the whole market was 2x overvalued and you're investing at 10 or 20% discounts, you're still way off of where you need it to be to have great returns.
Yeah, and I think it's you have that realization of that things maybe feel too expensive, but having never been through it before, right? Like I think both you and I kind of started investing in startups like around that time, so that was sort of quote unquote normal. Like you see the data, and you maybe see like, oh, prices are going up, but it kind of felt okay at the time.
Yeah, and I'm curious. I have a friend actually was over yesterday. We were hanging out, and he said, and he's in the crypto space. So granted, Bitcoin, as of recording this, is, I don't know what, 94. It came down from 99. He said things are starting to feel like it's 2021 again. And not necessarily in terms of valuations, although they've definitely come up, but the speed at which deals are getting done and how proactive and preemptive these rounds are. I'm curious, are you seeing the same thing?
Sort of. So I have not done a lot of AI related investing. I've done a little bit. I'm working on my Q3 LP update, which I'm going to send out. I've just kind of found some data. I actually think that the hottest startups of today are actually more overvalued than they were in 2021. And that's basically if you just take a look at what people are paying for companies in the public markets, they'll pay like, 8 times revenue for the average SaaS company versus what they'll pay in the private markets. In 2021, the private markets it was just under 2 times more expensive than publics. It was about 1.8x. And today it's about 3.3x more expensive. So the quote unquote the best, most expensive private market companies are almost twice as overvalued as they were in 2021. I think the caveat is that you're just going based off of a revenue multiple, and the revenue multiple it's basically how fast the company's growing. Like that's how people back into that. So the companies say are growing faster. Like there's AI companies that'll go from 0 to a couple million or 10 million in revenue in a couple quarters or a month or two. So if you think that that's going to continue, you could argue that it's justified. But that's the big question. It's like, is this thing going to get to $1 billion in revenue in 2 years and you're going to look like you got a good deal? I think that's a pretty open-ended question. It's very subjective in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'm sure that answer, where you fall there, is also very dependent on what kind of fund manager you are. If you're A16Z, you probably take that bet because you want to deploy a lot of capital and get into that B and C and D. For you, if you're more pre-seed and seed, maybe the calculus isn't quite there on those deals, because even if they do get to those revenue numbers, which you have to weight that by probability, it depends how much capital you got into the business. But I think, you're less of buying a call option to a later round, and it's your first round is your Super Bowl. It's not, okay, let me back the next big company so I can write 3 or 4 checks into it and get, $500 million into that company. And maybe your weighted return is 3 or 4x. You're looking for a 50x or 100x on that first check.
Yeah, my general strategy is, I look to try to get a 10x fund, roughly 10x. Usually kind of I think the ballpark baseline is 5x. Like if you're not getting at least 5x, you probably shouldn't be doing venture. So if you want to underwrite 5x, you need to if you just put about 20 positions in a fund, you write 20 checks. So that means each position is 5% of the fund. If you just assume, I just assume there's only one thing that hits in each fund and everything else is a 0. So I just say I need 5% of my fund to return 500% of the fund. So I need to 100x on this one position. what does the average outcome look like? Does the average outcome look like 700 million? Does it look like 2 billion? Is it 50 billion? If you assume that your average exit is going to be 50 billion, you can come in at very high prices to still get that 100x return. Now there's going to be dilution. You're probably going to get diluted at least 50%. So you probably need a 200x change in valuation, maybe more. So when you just think about like, okay, if you come in at 1 million post money, we'll say you get 200x change in valuation, you get diluted 500x or 500%. You only need to exit for 200 million to get a 5x fund. Now, is 1 million post money a realistic entry point? It's probably not. Is 5 million realistic? I don't know. Is 10? Is 15? So you kind of, I think as you start going beyond that, like, you kind of maybe have to start tapping out around 20 million, 25 million. Then you get to the point where your big winner has to exit for 3, 5, 10 billion. And then also when your entry points get too high, you miss out on the upside. So like, let's say you get a company that exits for $25 billion. They go public, but you only got an 80x on it because you came in at 80 million post or whatever. Like, and your fund, you barely returned the fund with it, but it was like it was like the biggest outcome ever. So I think there are all things you just have to think through while you're doing this. And you kind of like, it's hard to know thinking today, 10 years or 15 years in the future. So you kind of just have to have this almost like rationality of just what makes sense on this spreadsheet math that I'm doing. That's not going to be right. Like whatever I think is going to happen with this company, it's not going to actually happen. So I don't know. That's my general framework for it though.
It's super interesting. I think also what made that worse in 21 and 22 is people were logo chasing. So funds were getting raised so quickly where if I could get into ramp at $1 billion, I would write that, someone would write that check at $1 billion because like, oh, this thing's gonna get marked up to 8 in a year. And is it worth 8 at the time? Who knows? I mean, someone paid it, but okay, but now I can put ramp on my deck to go raise my fund too and start stacking funds. And I think that was the game people were in.
Yeah, which, I mean, it's a game. I mean, you can play that game. Some people play it, some people play it really well, but it's not the game I want to play. I want to actually make money for people.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, so speaking about making money, I want to talk about just Morning Brew. Like, how did it initially get started? Like way back in the day. I know I'm in Ann Arbor. You guys started in Michigan, you and Alex. Just how to get started.
Yeah, I'll tell the story quickly. My co-founder, Alex, was helping some friends with interview prep. And in doing that, he was a senior. He had a job lined up at Morgan Stanley. His friends didn't. And in doing interview prep with his friends, he realized very quickly that people just didn't read business news. They didn't read the journal. No one was on Twitter. People weren't consuming business news. And he just thought it was crazy that these people were trying to get jobs as traders, as bankers, consultants, and no one knew what was happening in the business world.
Why not? That's like the first step is like, you should know what's going on in the market.
Yeah, I just think it was just dry. It was dense. It was boring. People just didn't want to read the journal cover to cover. And I also think things were a little different 10 years ago. I think the average age of the journal subscriber was probably 5 years younger. They're now even older. But I don't think the journal realized they had an age problem, or at least not one that they were addressing. And so they were truly writing for people in their 70s or whatever the average age of the journal is. I don't know. It's probably quite old now. And so they were playing to their target audience. And so this audience, it's a classic story of an audience being underserved and the light bulb moment of I can do it better. And so Alex started doing that and I joined him to write a daily email newsletter. It was first focused on the financial markets. Then it became broader business world, took off at Michigan, went from 0 to 2,000 in like 3 to 6 months. We built the same, we basically sat outside of finance 101, accounting 101 classes, and basically just bullied people into signing up, giving us their email. We typed their email on our landing page. And then we said, okay, well, we could probably turn this into an ambassador program and scale what we did in Michigan at 30 schools and 50 schools, 100 schools. And it's funny, I was actually at a wedding on Saturday night and someone's like, I was one of the original ambassadors to Ohio State, which was really funny and a crazy turn of events. But yeah, it just took off. And so we got to 60, 70,000 subscribers via the ambassador program. And I decided to go full time.
Like, did you know it was going to be a big thing? Like how did you kind of figure out that Because I know you did a banking internship. Like, how did you decide like this is actually going to be better? This kind of silly newsletter concept that doesn't like no one has said this is a viable business compared to like.
I wish I could, and look, I could lie and tell a better story, but I'll tell the honest truth was we didn't, right? We started off as a side project. I decided I was not going to go back to my finance internship for other reasons before I decided to go full time on Morning Brew. And so I was figuring out what should I do next. I was like, well, I have this thing, it's doing pretty well. Maybe we can double it or triple it. It could bring in enough money to help me figure out what I can do next. Still a side project. And it just took off from there. I felt as if I had my whole senior year to work on it. And whether I was naive or lucky, my thinking was if senior year comes and goes and I can't turn this into a business and I make no traction senior year, I'll just go back to Moelis and I'll beg them for that job. And if they don't give me that job, I'll try to go work at the big 4 consulting firms. I really think I can get a job there. And if I can't do that, maybe I'll go work at a startup. And if I can't do that, I'll go get my MBA. And I think there was enough, the decision tree had enough outcomes where I felt confident I could figure something out if this Morning Brew thing didn't work. And when I graduated, there was enough traction where we were going to spend a year on it and go forward. Alex had quit his job at Morgan Stanley. So summer of 2017, we were all in, moved to New York, working out of an incubator. And in 2018 for us, I mean, look, we started again. Things happened very quickly. Summer 2017, we were both simultaneously working on it full time. It took us 6 months to kind of figure out the kinks. And 2018, we're just off the races. 2018, we 10x from 100,000 to 1 million subscribers.
And were you making money when you decided, like, let's work on this thing full time? Like, was there a little bit of revenue coming in, or was it still kind of not quite there yet?
Yeah, 2017, we did $300,000 of revenue.
Okay, so you could live off of that.
Yeah, we a revenue, not a profit.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's enough. You could have made it work.
We took very little salaries in 2017, but 2018 we did 3.1 million of revenue. And in 2019 we did 13.3. So it was like 300,000, 3.1, 13.3, 20, 46. So it was a quick ramp.
Yeah, that's like a software company almost. Like, that's pretty impressive.
It was crazy. Yeah. We and in hindsight, it felt like a software company because those were our advertisers, and we just talked about 2021, 2022. We ended up being the biggest beneficiaries of all that money. That money poured into those companies, and those B2B SaaS companies came to us and said, hey, look, we got to spend $1 million in the next month. We have to grow. ROI doesn't matter. Just help us grow. We couldn't collect money as fast as it was coming in. It was crazy.
And this thing all started like initially you were like attaching a PDF to an email, right? Like you didn't even write it in this pretty newsletter format, right?
Yeah, I think if you look up, Forbes has an article with the PDF. It was called Market Corner, and there was remember clip art where you can it was like crap. There was a bull and a bear fighting on the.
I've actually seen this. Yeah, I've seen one of the first issues. I think
pretty horrible,
pretty bad. Like it was just a bunch of words, basically.
Yeah, it was really bad. It was really bad. No tone, really, and no graphics, no visuals. I mean, the only people taking newsletters seriously in a non-commerce way, in a, hey, we are going to deliver information in a newsletter, not with the purpose of driving you to a website or to our YouTube page. We are going to make newsletter a product with the skim. They were doing it pretty well at the time.
This was 2015, 16-ish?
2015. Yeah, I think they started in 2012. They raised their first round of funding, I think 2014. They raised a seed or an A around then. And we're like, I just thought we can do this better for a different audience, learn from what they've done, learn from mistakes they've made. And I think we can be a great business. And to your point, people told me we were crazy. Very well-known media execs, some of whom I think would call us and say, you're making a huge mistake. You have this cool brand. Go raise a bunch of money and put video on Facebook, right? The whole pivot video thing.
Oh, yeah, that was the thing at the time.
And we were so lucky in the fact that we just had no idea how to even do that. So I always say we were the only team who could have built Morning Brew, and it's not a compliment, it's an insult.
Because you were so bad at everything else.
Yeah, we had no idea. We barely could put out a daily email. So, Axios comes out, I think 2018, 2019, and they launched 10 newsletters. We're like, 10 newsletters? We can barely do one. They come out and they're doing events. We said, events? We can't even write a newsletter. But what that did is it forced, and the very best thing we ever did was for longer than anyone else, stay more focused than anyone else on the one thing that mattered to us, which is write, grow, and sell the best possible newsletter. So by the time we launched something else, we were the biggest business newsletter in the world. Maybe not the world, but in America, right? No other newsletter had 1.5 million, 2 million subscribers. So we started dipping our toe in the water in some of these B2B verticals, whether it was marketing or retail, but the machine was built. That daily newsletter was a $10 million plus product. And so we were fueling everything with profits from the newsletter. We raised one round of funding in 2017. We raised $750,000. We barely dipped into that money, and we never raised money again. And it was because we just didn't, we were not investing in other things. We just said, hey, let's become best in the world at this one thing.
So how much at the time was a newsletter subscriber work? Or I guess like what was the general monetization model? Like how did you make money? It was 100% ads?
Yeah, so it was 100% ads. And look, it still is vast majority ads. Now there's ads across video and podcasting and a variety of ads. But I mean, look, we can do the math. We ended 2018 at 1 million subscribers, and we ended 2019. Sorry, we ended 2019. Let's call it almost 2 million. So on average, we had 1.5 million subscribers that year in 2019, and we did 13 million of revenue. So rough math was a little over $10 a subscriber if I'm doing that right.
Just the value, like how much revenue. And then I'm assuming like at the time, people were newsletters was kind of like the ugly stepchild. Like no one cared about monetizing newsletters. So I mean, it was probably not that hard to acquire people. Like it wasn't that competitive, if I'm remembering right.
I'll tell you a story, but first, it's funny because in 2017, 2018, all we said is, oh, if only we started this business in 2012, 2013, we'd be acquiring subscribers so much cheaper. And then in 2020, people said, oh, if only we started this business in, people were starting in 2020 said, if only we started in 2015, digital ads are only getting more expensive. And so, yes, if we started earlier, it'd be cheaper. But on a, let's call it time adjusted basis, we picked a very good time. And so just to speak for a second how hyper focused we didn't do social media for the first 3 years of our business. And people are like, why are you posting on Instagram?
Yeah, that's the classic way to grow today. It's just like you post on Twitter, you post on LinkedIn, Instagram, etc.
So at the time, our readers weren't really on those platforms. And when they weren't signing up for newsletters for those platforms. It was different. It was, Instagram is still more in the less like the town, what does Zuckerberg call it? The town hall, less town hall, more living room. And we had no way to make money off it. So I said, look, if we can't make money, why would we hire a social media manager and pay them $70, $80, $90,000 a year? Let's put that money straight back into growing our newsletter. Because again, write, grow, and sell the best possible newsletter. But we had a referral program. And if you referred people, you got Morning Brew swag. And the most common thing we sent out at 3 referrals was stickers. Well, in the prime of that referral program, we were shipping out 1,000 pairs, we sent out 2 or 3, 1,000 packages of stickers a week. We hand packed every single envelope. We hand licked every single envelope. We stamped it. We put the label on. And so Friday at 2:30, 3 o'clock, we'd stop working. This is still when WeWork was cool and they had beer for everyone. I think they got rid of the beer. And we basically, sometimes we'd literally bring the WeWork keg into our office, our tiny little office, and we'd set up an assembly line. And I'd be in charge of packing. Someone else would be in charge of whatever. We'd have a couple of beers and we'd brainstorm a Friday social media post. And one time we said, it'd be kind of funny if we, GroupMe was very popular at the time. I was using a lot. And we said, it'd be kind of funny if we had this fake conversation between Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and Zuckerberg. And we started this series where we make these really funny posts about with all these people talking as if they're in a group chat. And we had, I don't know, maybe 20,000 followers on Instagram at the time. And there wasn't the discovery there was today. So for something to go viral took way, way, way more effort. Now the followers means nothing. And we post this thing and we got 40,000 likes, more likes than followers. And we're like, whoa, so there's something there. And we kind of forgot about it. And then 2 weeks later, one of our friends went to Facebook's F8 conference and heard whoever, maybe it was Boz or whoever was running ads at the time, basically imply, I shouldn't say this, but we're launching Instagram story ads. This is when Instagram was really blowing up, trying to compete with Snapchat. This is end of 2018. Yeah. Said we're launching Instagram story ads. The image sizing is going to be different and it's going to be opt-in. Right now, everything's opt-out. You kind of get everything. At the time, you hand-picked which did you want to be on Right Rail, on Facebook, wherever you want to be. And so we said, well, we know you have to be early to platforms to get cheap subscribers. We're going to be the first ones on Facebook, Instagram stories ads. We said, that's our goal. Let's be the number one. And we refreshed Facebook Ads Manager like every 15 minutes
to see if it opened up.
And I'm convinced we were the first advertiser on Facebook Ad Manager. Or for Instagram stories ads. Number one. Like I am very convinced that's the case because we refresh every 15 minutes. But we didn't think about what creative to put because we were so excited about getting access. So in a panic, we said that Instagram blew up. Let's just put that as the ad. And it was lightning in a bottle. And for 3 or 4 days, we were getting 2-cent CACs. We were getting subscribers for 2 and 3 pennies. And Tyler and I just pulled like 2 to 3 all-nighters in a row, just optimizing and tweaking these ads. And I think we grew 150,000 subscribers in like 2 to 3 weeks. And that was just the heyday. So you ask about acquiring subscribers. It was good then, but that week in particular was life-changing for me. And it really is a sign that it is worth being early to a platform. You just never know when you're going to find the right creative with the right ad mechanism. And you're probably going to miss on 9 out of 10, but that 10th out of 10 can change your life. That was just huge for us. I'll never forget that. It was product market fit with the best possible top of funnel we could ever find. It was crazy.
Yeah. If you say, okay, you're making on average $10 a year per user, we'll just make it simple, $1 a month, whatever. Maybe it's like 80 cents, 90 cents a month. But you're acquiring them for 5 cents, 10 cents, whatever. As long as you're lining up the ad deals, like you're paying yourself back instantly, like within a month. Like that's insane.
That's how we were able to scale with $750,000. And also remember, an ad-based business is horrible from a cash flow standpoint.
Yeah, because they will pay you like a quarter later, right?
If you're lucky. Yeah, sometimes 120-day terms.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so, again, that's just how fast we were growing. So it was amazing. You hear these stories about product market fit. You rarely see that floodgate open in media. And we were just very fortunate that it happened.
Interesting. And to your point about the ad creative that you chose, I've heard you might know Nik Sharma.
I know Nik well. Yeah, he's a good friend.
Yeah, I've seen him say before that his strategy, usually like the lazy man's marketing, like paid ad strategy, is just find your best organic posts and just boost them and just pay. And there's a reason that they did well organically, so just pay to boost them again.
Totally.
So that's usually if you're just starting to do paid ads, just find your best stuff and boost it, and like that's a good way to kind of get it going. Obviously, maybe you don't want to do that forever. You need to come up with new ideas, but
absolutely, yeah.
How did it go? So you scale. I think I've heard you've told me before you've scaled from like 100K to $1 million in that year. It was mostly from Instagram and referral programs. Like, was that how you kind of quote unquote got to scale?
Yeah, that was 80% of the subscribers that year was referral program and paid mostly on Facebook.
Okay, and that's kind of contrarian. It's like most people would say don't do paid growth, but it sounds like it worked because it was efficient.
Yeah, it was efficient. And we had the ad sales team lined up to monetize it immediately. So we built them, again, going back to we built the machine. We've been training for this for 2 to 3 years. So when the opportunity presented itself, we were ready to capitalize on it. I wouldn't recommend today people put tens of thousands of dollars into paid unless they have a real plan to monetize that audience. Because newsletters are great, they're subscriptions, but they're also terrible. They're subscriptions and people can unsubscribe pretty easily.
Yeah. It sounds like a good takeaway from the conversation is like media businesses can be insanely valuable and efficient, but also end terribly if you don't run them correctly. If that's a fair way to put it.
Yeah, and for all that for all that work and all that effort, you sell for 8 to 10 times EBITDA. And if you were a product-led SaaS company, we were saying before, you're selling for 8 to 10 times revenue. So it's a lot of work for, you could argue, not the same reward.
So how did you get the first kind of sponsorship deal lined up? I feel like you've maybe said Capital One.
No, so our big advertising deal was Discover. That wasn't our first advertising deal, but it was our first big ad deal. The way we got that was a way, again, it was just so scrappy. The daughter of the CMO of Discover Card was a huge Morning Brew fan. She got her mom to start reading. And I think we would look through the names of every single person who subscribed to the newsletter every day. And we'd LinkedIn check everyone. And, we saw some really cool people. We messaged all of them. And a lot of that ended up being our investor base, our advertiser base. And we saw the CMO of Discover Card reading Morning Brew, and we messaged her, and she sent us, she sent us to her agency, but it was a good signal for the agency to start working with us. And the first RFP they sent us, by the way, I didn't know what an RFP was.
What does it stand for people who don't know?
Request for a proposal. It's, just basically asking for what can we do for what at the time they asked for $250,000 proposal. I was basically like, look, you can own the company for $250,000. We had 50,000 or 75,000 subscribers. We hadn't raised any money. I mean, it was a nothing. So it's just very funny we got kicked into that system. And we worked with Discover for a while. They were a big advertiser. They were also another reason we were able to scale was they gave us six figures frequently.
Interesting. That's awesome. So then how do you recommend approaching one of those processes if you're trying to do some kind of sponsorship revenue? You mentioned this thing called an agency. Is that a big piece of it if I've never heard about this before?
Yeah, so the media buying world is split into two types of, there's basically two ways to go. You can go client direct and talk to the head of growth, the head of marketing, or you can talk to the ad agency. Normally, ad agencies are only hired by companies that are really big, right? I'm not talking about, hey, we run your Facebook ads. I'm saying, no, hey, here's $50 million or $100 million. Go deploy that money. Typically, that money is brand awareness dollars. Not always, but a lot of times it is. And they actually have budget, right? Sitting there saying, we need to deploy $50 million. So if you can get in touch with the agency, it's a win. It's a home run. What I would say, though, is that's really hard for the problem I explained before, which is if you're a newsletter with 50,000 subscribers and I'm an agency who American Express gave $50 million, am I really going to spend my time talking to you when Morning Brew can eat up 2 million of that and Vox can do 4 or 5 million of that and the New York Times can do 4 or 5 million? Probably not. So yeah, it's really great to get in touch with agencies, but much harder. I would say that getting in touch with, especially performance marketers, is where beyond Discover is where we started. If you have an engaged audience, performance marketers at B2B companies or big brands, they are okay oftentimes working with smaller advertisers because I would say the brand is more focused on ROI, whereas the agency, just like honestly any service provider you hire, wants to make the most amount of money, the least amount of work. So if you can make their life easy, the agency will give you a bunch of money.
Interesting. And so I feel like I've mentioned before, or I've heard you guys mention before, you did this thing where you, to meet all these heads of growth at SaaS and D2C companies. How did you get in front of all these people when you're still kind of pretty small?
Yeah, I mean, Alex ran sales in the early days and he was just an animal. He just LinkedIn messaged every single one. And, it was like everything else we did in the early days, hand-to-hand combat. What we found is those heads of growth bounced around from job to job. So one day they worked at Casper, the next day it was Warby Parker, the next day it was at Bombas Stocks. So very quickly, they actually helped us get inroads to these companies because either they went to another company we want to work with, or we said, hey, you had a good experience with us. I saw you worked at Casper 6 months ago. Can you intro us to Casper? Right? And so the marketing community as a whole, very, very, they bounce around jobs a lot. They love community, love it. So they all know each other. So referrals and recommendations, once we got our foot in the door, was a really great way to spread. And I think oftentimes people are just scared to ask questions. They just don't say, hey, look, would you mind connecting us to that person? Oftentimes people want to just help out. And so that when I talk to people who run newsletters, almost no one is just asking their advertisers to refer them to new advertisers.
Interesting. Yeah. And it's true. It's like if they're making money with you, like they're getting good ROI, I guess there's a question of would they be willing to introduce you to other people because you're a good product, or would they be secretive and be like, hell no, I don't want anyone else to know about you.
So it's funny. Some are definitely secretive, but oftentimes what we see is the desire to have an insight and share with a person in the market industry, hey, I spend money with Morning Brew and it works. Super, trumps, hey, I have this unique thing. I'm not going to share it with anyone. Marketers love to talk. They love to share things.
Yeah, they're marketers. They like to get the word out. And then you mentioned you kind of started to hire up on the sales team. How do you hire good salespeople? Like, what did you find works?
So hiring salespeople to me is the hardest job to hire for by far.
What makes it so hard?
Yeah, so sales and marketing, specifically sales, I mean, these people's profession is to sell you. So if they're going to be good at selling anything, it's themselves. And so they're just so good, especially more senior salespeople, CROs, chief sales officers. I mean, a lot of CROs are actually horrible at their job, but they're amazing at interviewing. That's what they do the best at. And so you really have to weed through all that sales nonsense. And I think I found 2 tricks for doing that. One, oftentimes salespeople and revenue leaders have very great answers. They'll say, oh, I would solve that with 3 things. One, things that sound really good frameworks, but just ask why or ask them to explain that. Like go 2 or 3 levels deeper. And all of a sudden you'll see people start to break down and they'll have this beautifully crafted answer to a question. Hey, can you speak a little more about that first one? I don't totally understand that. Can you explain it in a different way? And all of a sudden that polish will rub off and it'll be pretty poor. It's, hey, sorry, I'm still not getting it. It must be me. Can you maybe explain to me in a different way? I don't understand it that way.
So what are you looking for then? Like, are you looking for them to just give you a different perspective on it or answer the question differently? Or
no, what I'm looking for is when I ask you, hey, how do you run your sales team? And how do you know it works? I want you to really know how you run your sales team. Say, oh, look, I do weekly sales meetings with my team and I trust my leaders, all these fluffy things. Say, okay, great. But how do you think about goaling your team? They'll be like, oh, well, I work with my CFO and okay, like when you work with your CFO, how do you decide, is it bottoms up or is it tops down? And you can really make sure they're in the weeds and they really understand things. Again, oftentimes CROs are really polished. They understand things such a high level, but do they understand how the sausage gets made? Or are they just telling their lieutenants what to do? I want someone who has the ability to both be up here, can run a team, but also can tell you every single thing. They can tell you how their SDRs are doing outreach. They can tell you how them and their FP&A or their revenue strategy person sets goals. They can tell you what happens when one of their sellers misses goal 2 quarters in a row. What's your process for making sure people get to their goal? So if you can't do that, but you have a really polished answer, that works really well in an hour-long interview or an interview process. But week 4 on the job, we have a real problem. Hey, look, I have a problem, Turner. These 2 sellers aren't doing well. What should we do about it? And their answer is, oh, well,
theoretical.
Yeah, it doesn't work. It's actually time to get the weeds. So the first thing I would do is really push back and ask why, just over and over again. The second thing, and this one's a little more controversial, I've tweeted this and people don't like it and I don't care, is one, you have to do off-book references. You have to reference people who and the media world's so small, it's very easy to find people who know them. You just can't, references from people who they give you are fairly useless. A lot of these times, those people have been trained by that person to give the same cookie cutter answers they're giving.
They'll see like, hey, I'm interviewing with Morning Brew. Can you make sure you tell them that I'm really good at hitting quota or something?
Totally. And so instead, you do off-book interviews. The thing that I think is controversial that people don't like, and it's mixed. Again, I got some slack or caught some shit on Twitter, was what you asked them. I ask every reference to say, hey, look, let's say I saw you, Turner, at a party in a year from now. And you're on a reference call for someone named Jeff. And I say, hey, Turner, like crazy, Jeff didn't work out and we had to let Jeff go. Why would that be? And I think that is a much better way to ask what are Jeff's weaknesses questions. Because if you ask what are Jeff's weaknesses questions, you're going to get, oh, they work too hard. You're going to get those like BS answers. But when you say, hey, we fired them, it did, in this theoretical instance, it didn't work. Why? They can't say, oh, well, Jeff was working too hard on the weekends and you fired him. You never would do that. So you force them to give something that is actually critical of that person. Then you say, oh, that's really interesting. Oh, okay. Maybe their leadership skills aren't as good as I thought. Maybe their communication skills aren't as good. And then you circle back. You don't say, hey, Jeff's, hey, Turner said blah, blah, blah. But you say, hey, let's spend 15 more minutes on a call talking about whatever that person identified. And you kind of ping back and forth. To me, that's how you get to actual issues. Now, people don't like that because they think it's a gotcha question, but it's not even solely to get the person, not hire them. It also helps you onboard them. If you know they're not quite as strong at whatever you told me that Jeff's not as strong as, that's what I'll work on in the first week when I onboard them to make sure that weakness becomes a strength. That has saved me on like 3 or 4 hires.
Really? In terms of better onboarding and just knowing the weaknesses, or just not hiring people, or both?
Both. I'd say about 50-50. 50% of the time I said, oh, wow, that's interesting. I didn't pick up on that interview process. I didn't realize that Jeff wasn't such a good public speaker. And they'd say, well, Jeff's really good when Jeff comes prepared with notes and has talking points. But when they're off the cuff, just a hypothetical example, they're not as strong. Okay, let's make sure that Jeff has talking points when they're talking to the team. Let's make sure that Jeff doesn't go to the team off the cuff then. A bad example, but things like that to make sure that you have them be a stronger leader. And again, there are times where I said, oh, I didn't realize that. And I'll go interview them and you'll see in a whole different light. You'll say, oh, wow, I thought that Jeff was really analytical, but you're right. I didn't ask why enough there. I pushed really hard. And actually, Jeff's not that analytical. Does that matter? And if so, let's reevaluate.
Interesting. Yeah. It's not quite related, but it reminds me of one time I messed up pretty bad investing in this company where I didn't push them hard enough on the go to market and they just never launched. They just couldn't even figure out how to get people to start using it. And the thing that they said on the surface, it sounded so good. But in reality, when I was reflecting back in this conversation, I'm like, man, I didn't even drill down on that at all. And it makes sense because it was kind of, it was one of those things where, oh yeah, I guess that could work. But yeah, they never were able to like get anyone to use the product basically. So I like the asking why, like just pushing people a little bit deeper. I guess I feel like I do that on the podcast too, is I always have people go a little bit deeper on the question. So
yeah, that's where the gems come out, right? And so again, this is not all just to suss out the person's bad. This is not all a gotcha. This is also to make the person seem impressive. Maybe their first answer wasn't that good. And as you get deeper, you're like, wow, Turner really understands goaling. Turner has a really unique and deep perspective on how to set goals that motivate sellers. That's awesome. I'm glad I figured that out. So this is not all to suss out bad people. Oftentimes it really helps me figure out, okay, no, this person's really smart and they spend time thinking about this part of the job.
Yeah. And I guess just thinking about like hiring team, I know you're kind of involved with this other company called Oceans. You're an investor. I'm not sure the exact setup of everything, but can you just kind of talk about the new company that you're pretty involved with?
Yeah, so I'm a early investor and pretty involved in this company called Oceans. It's a white glove overseas talent agency. So we help source EAs, marketers, find really anyone you want for a variety of companies. So we source for GPs and funds like you. We source for large direct to consumer companies like True Classic Teas. We source for, I think you mentioned Nik Sharma. We work with Nik. We work with private equity backed businesses, and we work with dental offices who want help.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so it's the full gambit of types of companies, and the reason we're different is we source all of our talent exclusively from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is a really interesting country. Our CEO worked for a Japanese company, and most or a lot of their talent was sourced from Sri Lanka, and he saw just how high of a bar that talent at that Sri Lanka HQ was for that company. For a variety of reasons, a lot of people in Sri Lanka get STEM degrees, so you have really strong technical skills. A lot of people in Sri Lanka either go to the US or go to England to get educated to go to college, and they'll actually oftentimes stay there for a year or 2 or 3 to work at a US company, and then they'll go back to Sri Lanka, go work at a multinational corporation. There's a bunch of them in Sri Lanka, but the cost of living, like a lot of places in Southeast Asia, is very low. And so the wages aren't that great. So there's an amazing opportunity to get these people who are culturally acquainted with US workforces because they interned in college or they worked after college. So it's really unique. Not many places in the world you get that, where you have people who have STEM degrees, who worked at multinational corporations, who can really embed themselves culturally in a US based company. And so again, we help companies save, if it's a single hire, maybe $50 to $100,000, but we have companies who have 10 to 15 people in Sri Lanka with us who are saving $1.5 million, $2 million a year. So it's really, really meaningful. And we scaled really fast. It's been around for about 2.5 years, well over 10 million of ARR. So it's a pretty fun and cool business to be a part of.
Interesting. And is it a recruiting agency or is it like a full-time, like how does that whole process work if I'm?
Yeah. So there's kind of like a spectrum here. On one end of the spectrum, it's more recruiting, right? So firms will just go out and hire someone and they'll be working at Banana Capital and it's up to you to deal with everything. If they quit, you have to replace them and they charge a one-time fee. That's a recruiting model. We're more of a staffing agency. Think more BPO. So we employ the people, but from your perspective, they look and feel and act like they're full-time Banana Capital. So they're not working for multiple companies, but we deal with all the HR stuff, the payments. If they go out and leave, we'll help you replace them or to have someone when they're out and leave. If they, get sick, we help out there on all of that stuff. So more of the BPO staffing model than the recruiting model.
Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting point of where I've definitely had before, like interns had employees, they're out for like 2 weeks and you're just kind of like, I guess I don't have anyone. So you guys kind of swap in on your end. I've had that before. Like I think we both work with AngelList for our funds. I'll have AngelList, they'll like email, they'll be like, hey, I'm going on vacation for 2 weeks. Austin or Turner is your new person. And it's just kind of like a smooth transition. Why Sri Lanka? Like, am I wrong in thinking like my connotation of Sri Lanka is just not high bar of talent? Like, is this just like not a good way, like wrong objectively?
So that objectively is wrong. And that is actually our biggest opportunity as a business is to, I didn't know this either. And I actually, the way I became a part of Oceans was I had worked with a lot of overseas EA firms trying to find an EA for myself. I said we were super frugal. Yeah, we were super frugal in 2017, 2018, 2019. And so I probably worked with 3 or 4 firms. They were sourcing talent from the Philippines. There are a lot of really great people in the Philippines. This is not a knock on the Philippines, but there's also so much competition for Philippines talent. Everyone, there's millions of firms launching every niche in the Philippines. Sri Lanka is less of a competitive market. So everything I said before, and then also there's less competition. So I was going through EA after EA. I kind of gave up on overseas talent. I couldn't find someone who was really enhancing my life. In fact, felt as if I was losing time because I was proofreading emails or, just culturally, the other EAs I had, they couldn't book me a reservation in New York because they didn't know New York City. They couldn't book my trip to LA because they just didn't understand logistically how LA worked and traffic, all that stuff. And so I'd have them book my travel, but it was more time to educate them on LA. Ian, who's the CEO of Oceans, came to me and said, look, I promise you this is different. Culturally, it's a better fit. Education-wise, better fit. Over time, finally said, fine, I'll give it a try. And I was blown away. I was like probably customer 4. And I said, this is incredible. This caliber of talent is so good. And so I became an investor because of that. I basically begged Ian. I said, look, you have to let me become a partner in this business. I have to buy into it. I think it's incredible. And I've just been buying up shares since then. So I kind of dog fooded the product, if you will, and became an investor.
And is this the same Ian that he kind of works with Indomitian Sue? Is this the same guy?
So that's how I met Ian, actually, is because he was working with Indomitian. So I didn't realize that you knew that, but yeah, that's him.
Yeah, well, I one of those two, I like they either Indomitian Sue like replies to my stuff on Twitter sometimes. I'm like, is this actually the football player who used to play for the Lions? Like I know, and I think I DM'd him once and was like, hey, want to chat sometime? And he responded, and like it was just him. And then Ian was on the call too, and I met them and I actually didn't realize it was the same Ian. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, again, it's an incredible business. He's a great CEO, so it's cool to be a part of.
Nice. And then just in terms of like team co-founders. What do you think made your relationship with Alex, your co-founder at Morning Brew? Like, you guys are pretty different, right? Like, how did you guys manage your relationship?
It's funny. In some ways, we're very similar. In some ways, we're very different. We're both white Jews who grew up in the Northeast. We both went to private school. We both went to Michigan, which is where we met. We both were in the business school. So in some ways, we were very, very similar. We were in the same fraternity at Michigan. So in some ways, again, we were basically like the same person. But in many ways, we think very differently. And I think that shared background, but the fact that we complemented each other made it so successful. Alex is incredibly creative. He's constantly thinking about pie in the sky ideas. I was there to kind of bring him down and say, okay, that's a great idea, but let's figure out how we can actually get there and do that. Alex also showed me a level of determination and hard work that I didn't know existed. Alex, there was just no stopping Alex when he wanted to do something. For example, we spoke about sales before, but we'd say, okay, we need 30 advertisers to spend $50,000 to get to the revenue number we need to, for example. I'd say, well, that's really tough to get 30 advertisers because we're getting a 3% response rate on our LinkedIn cold outreach. And I'll say, okay, great. Yeah, we'll message 1,000 people a day and we'll get there. I'm like, well, we can't message 1,000 people a day. And Alex would be like, well, why not? I'd be like, I don't know. That's a good question.
In theory, you could just send more cold DMs.
And he'd say, great, let's start. And we literally sit there and we'd hours and hours and hours. We'd send, and we got there. And, look, I'm not saying brute forcing everything is the way to do it. But in the early days, it was just, there was just no way we were going to fail. And I think that was the biggest commonality between us. We had different ways to go about it. I think I was a little more strategic. Alex was more of a visionary. I was more of the implementer, if you want to use the more business school jargon. Yeah, but we had this common background and a common belief that there was no way we were going to fail. We didn't know the order of magnitude that we're going to succeed, but we weren't going to fail. There was too much for us on the line, and the opportunity was too there. We saw it every day. And I think that's what really connects us. We had this, when people were telling us to pivot to video, and people were telling us that newsletters are silly and it's a side project and it's a dumb thing and go take the job in finance. We both mutually took that leap of faith and we said, we are not going to fail. We're going to make this work. And yeah, it led to a really strong bond and we're really great friends now. And it's been an awesome 10-year journey.
You mentioned you were super frugal. Alex actually told me to ask about this. In the early days, what was the dental benefit plan that you guys gave to people?
Part of this is frugality. Part of this is we had no idea what we were doing. But in the early days, we didn't give people laptops. They had to bring their own laptop to work. There was no work laptop. You came to work with your laptop. And we'd have employees being like, you don't provide a laptop? And like, what do you mean? Like, we could dock it from your pay, but of course not. And that wasn't even me being cheap necessarily. I just didn't know every company gave you a laptop. Like, we're a startup. We're not going to spend money on that. So the dental plan, we did have healthcare. We didn't have a 401k at first, but we did have a healthcare plan. And one day someone came in and said, hey, do we have a dental plan? And of course we didn't have a dental plan. I didn't even know what a dental plan was. So I walked to 7-Eleven and those pick flossers, those like flossers that you like
a thing that you hold.
Yeah. You like put in your teeth. Yeah. So instead of like the string floss, it's in like a little plastic pick and you pick your teeth. I bought everyone at the office a pack of those and I handed them to everyone. Every new employee got a pack of floss. And that was our dental plan for like a year and a half. Was when people asked what the dental plan was, I said, hey, you can go check the drawer with another pack of floss.
Wow. Okay. This is actually another thing Alex told me to ask you. How did you used to eat rotisserie chicken? Like you said, you ate them, you just would like eat it with your bare hands like a Neanderthal? What is that?
We would eat a lot of like very cheap rotisserie chicken in the early days, I think what he's referencing. But we found ways to be really frugal. So I think another good example of that is, remember Meal Pal? I actually think it might still exist. Do you remember Meal Pal? It was in New York City. You basically, for $5 a day, you could get lunch. And Thursday at 4:00, you have to pick your lunch place. And they would give you choices and you'd like go to the restaurant, you'd pick it up. Well, we found a hack, which was a Mediterranean place near us would let you make it was like a bowl, but you can make the bowl yourself for $5. So we'd stack the bowl so high that we could have lunch and dinner, and you'd literally need like rubber bands to band the thing together with the lid because it was so high. And I'm not kidding. We would eat that for lunch and dinner, and for $2.50 we had 2 meals, and for like 12 months straight, that's all we did. Now, yeah, it was a good strategy. It worked really, really well in the early days.
Yeah, and Mediterranean food is like, that's an okay thing to do that with. Like, it's kind of healthy for you. Like, it's not bad.
Yeah, a lot of hummus and chicken and veggies. Yeah, it was good.
One question, like, what is your goal with Morning Brew? Like, when do you, because I know you're still super involved. Like, you're the CEO, you're running it day to day. What's kind of the goal with all of this? Like, when do you say Morning Brew is at the destination of where I want to get it to?
Yeah, it goes back to the very beginning of Morning Brew, which was we thought there was an opportunity to create a better Wall Street Journal. So yeah, I'd say we were fairly successful. I think we're, in this grand scheme of media, I do think we're one of the more successful media companies launched in the last 10 years. But the Wall Street Journal is a really big company. And I think the Morning Brew has an opportunity to be the next Wall Street Journal. Now the journal's been around for, I don't know how long, maybe 100 years. So we have 90 years to go, or whatever it may be. But I think the impact the journal has on my parents' generation, Morning Brew has the opportunity to do that for millennials, Gen Z. We'll see how wide that gap can be. And so on one hand, yeah, we made good progress. On the other hand, there is a lot more to go. There's a big opportunity there to make more impact, obviously do more revenue and profits, but just to be a bigger part of this young business professionals' lives. And so we have a lot of ways to go.
Yeah, we didn't even hit on this, but you kind of sold part of the company to Business Insider at some point a couple of years ago. And then how big is it today? I don't know if we ever mentioned, like, what's the latest public stats?
Yeah, we're about 70 million of revenue and, 20-ish% EBITDA margin numbers. So you can do the math.
Nice. How many subscribers across? You have like 10 different newsletters at this point, right?
Over 6 million across everything.
Nice. It's impressive. Well, cool. I know you got to get running, but this was a lot of fun. Thanks for taking the time to chat.
Yeah, for sure. This is awesome.
And thank you for listening. If you like this episode, please leave a quick review or comment wherever you're listening or watching. Make sure to check the show notes for more on the topics mentioned throughout the conversation. And if you don't want to miss a future episode, subscribe to my newsletter, The Split, to get each episode plus a transcript emailed directly to your inbox every week. Thanks again for listening. See you in the next episode.
Hey everyone, Eric here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at ericaturpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.